It would be one of the biggest upsets in college football in 2024, but isn't that kind of a national trend? Will UCF topple BYU? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On UCF crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome into a Locked On Big 12, Locked On UCF crossover episode. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. And that is Mike G of the brand new Locked On UCF podcast. Give it a follow and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making these shows your first listen every single day. On today's show is BYU in hot water in Orlando. We'll also talk if the Big 12 can sneak 3 teams into the college football playoff. There's at least a scenario. And is it time to fire Gus Malzahn from UCF's football program? That's a big question to ask. We're going to ask it. If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs. Mike, off the top here, BYU, UCF, some call it a trap game. Others say that UCF has just figured it out on the ground enough to get it done this week. Are the Cougars in trouble?
The Cougars are in trouble. 354 yards on the ground against a pretty stout Iowa State defense this past week. Now, big news coming out of UCF was Gus Malzahn gave Ja'Cory Brown his vote of confidence, Drake, here through the rest of the season. But they managed him. They didn't let him throw the ball a ton. 8 for 20 through the air. However, on the ground, 60 some
odd yards. Yeah.
62 yards. But with his legs, 13 rushes for 154 yards. This is classic Gus Malzahn offense where, again, your quarterback is a threat to run. It made R.J. Harvey an even bigger threat to run. He had 196 yards on the ground. I'm looking for UCF to continue that trend there. Now, this week, they've got to get the wide receivers more involved, and they didn't put a ton on tape last week through the air, but I expect Kobe Hudson to show up in this one, man. I think it's going to be an all-timer. I called for UCF to beat Iowa State. They almost pulled off the upset last week. I think they do it this week.
You know, one thing, Mike, that I do believe bodes well, and while I picked BYU to win this game and they've all of a sudden become underdogs, Las Vegas has UCF picked by 2 points in this matchup in Orlando. Yeah. While I'm going to side with BYU in this, and I'll give my reasons here in a bit, I want to make note, Iowa State knew that UCF was going to run the football. There's one thing UCF has done all year long, and it's run the football. Even when KJ Jefferson was the quarterback, it was the ground game where UCF made its bed. What does that say about UCF that they effectively told the opposing team, hey, we're going to do one thing, and they still did it at such a high rate?
We talked about this earlier in the week over on Locked On UCF. Run blocking has, to some extent, been atrocious. That's how good Ja'Cory Brown has been with his legs. I mean, when you go back and you look at their PFF grades, it didn't fare well on that offensive line. As a matter of fact, Drake, offensive line has been kind of a mess, which is why I think they haven't thrown the ball more. So he's got to lean on the run. And Brown is a great runner. He's a great threat with his legs. So when you can create that mismatch there about who's getting it on that read option, right? It makes the play action more dangerous and the offense opens up for Gus Malzahn. That's why I think they stick with that plan this week, but you got to hit big plays. Look, you can't be one-dimensional, I think, this week versus BYU. If you're going to play one-dimensional football, you shrink the field, you make yourself easier to guard. But to your point, they knew they were going to run the football. They lined up and did it anyway. I don't think they're going to be able to do that to some extent. Look, Ja'Cory Brown, 0 on passes of 20 yards or more. I think he took like 7 shots down the field. He didn't hit a single one. That can't happen versus BYU this week. I think that he has to create the threat, make them at least scared that they might complete a big play over the top, and the running game continues to go wild. I like them to continue the trend.
You know, Mike, analytics would tell you that BYU should win this game by 10 points, if not more. And that's, little numbers on a piece of paper or a screen and not exactly what's going to play out on Saturday. But the big thing that I circle, UCF defensively, 110th in the country on 3rd and 4th down success. They can't get off the field defensively on late downs. Yeah. We've talked a lot about BYU's defense being able to hold up UCF. Maybe UCF scores 31. How do the Knights keep BYU from scoring 35?
Yeah, look, when you look at the numbers, UCF is in the bottom half of the conference in points allowed. here in this thing, right? They're giving up 17 yards. They're giving up 250 yards through the air, 114 yards on the ground. In today's college football, that's about average. But you're looking at a BYU team that it's going to be a significant, I think, challenge for them. Now, I'm looking at Jake Retzlaff, and I'm thinking, man, he's having himself a year, right? And I think that's going to be their biggest challenge, is stopping him defensively. Look, he's their everything. I think at one point last week, he was their leading passer, rusher. He's their whole offense. So stop Retzlaff. You got to take something away from him. I think you take away his ground game and you see where your chips fall there. And that's how you stop BYU from scoring a million points on you in this one.
Yeah, Ollie Gordon looked like Ollie Gordon last week against that BYU defense. Gives me confidence that UCF can run the ball. But the biggest question, again, would be defensively, how does UCF stop BYU? And Jake Retzlaff is where you start. If you stop him, you've got a much better shot at beating BYU, which so few teams have figured out to this point. Yeah,
look, last week, I want to note, they got a pick six last week. Should have been 2 pick sixes, but he dropped the ball right before he went into the end zone. I know he got a butt chewing after that one. But look, the opportunities will be there. They haven't done great this year defensively, but they have been opportunistic with turnovers in key moments. We saw that. That's what kept them in the game versus Iowa State. Ultimately, they folded at the end. They did a great job in the first half against Iowa State. And then, we saw Rocco Becht and Jalen Noel go absolutely wild there in the second half. I think Noel finished with over 150 yards receiving in this one. But Gus Malzahn's team this year, they'll get off to good starts, and they have been unable to finish games. How do you finish games? How are you going to finish defensively here in this one? Are you going to give up the big plays at the end like we've seen them do a few games this season? That's what they're going to be in the kitchen, I think, trying to solve when they look at the tape.
Mike, that was my next question for you. You took the words right out of my mouth and answered it perfectly, and that's whether or not UCF could close out a football game. We saw them do it early in the year, and then against Iowa State, they get up 28-14 and almost find a way to lose as Rocco Becht and company march down the field and beat UCF 38-35. Coming up, let's talk broad picture of the Big 12. Because Mike, you've covered college football for a long time, and there's this little dream scenario that's starting to wiggle its way out with 5 games to go for so many of these teams. Where the Big 12 can get 3 teams in the college football playoff. Let's go there next on our Locked On Big 12, Locked On UCF crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Hey, look, here recently, I've met a pretty lady. She's blonde and nice to me. And she loves Taylor Swift and was like, hey, do you want to go see Taylor Swift? I was like, that's not really my jam so much. I would rather use my Game Time app to go see a college anything. She's like, okay, well, can you get tickets on it? We're like, yeah, I can. And they're probably cheaper on Game Time. Actually, they are cheaper on Game Time than anywhere else. And if they're not, you get 110% of the difference because they have a lowest price guaranteed. Seat View. See the view from your seat. All-in pricing. Toggle that feature. Shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. If you're buying an MLB ticket, an NHL ticket, that's like $15. Oh, look, hey, $20 off. That's a free ticket. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time. Download Game Time. Mike G of Locked On UCF. Drake Toll with you, Locked On Big 12. Mike, before I give you my dream scenario, my little algorithm, my BCS thing that I've driven up in my head here, as someone who's covered college football for a long time, especially in SEC country, is there an opportunity for the Big 12 to get 2 or 3 college football playoff teams in?
2, absolutely. 3, I'm gonna tell you who I think the third might be here. But
don't say the UCF Knights. Don't do it, Mike.
I don't think I'm gonna do that today. We're gonna stay in reality land today, Drake.
Yeah.
But in talking with my good friend over at ESPN, Heather Dinich, she believed that the SEC coming into this season had a good shot to get 5 teams into the inaugural 12-team playoff. Now, she nailed it last year. She told the whole world, look, Texas and Alabama are making this playoff. People called her names. They scoffed at it. And then ultimately Texas and Alabama made the playoff. Sure. But this year, I think that though I believe her, there was a chance. I'm not so sure that 5 teams are going to get in. As a matter of fact, I'm almost positive. There's a lot of parity in the SEC right now. So right now you've got Alabama sitting there with 2 losses before November for the first time since 2007, Drake. The Tide, I don't think they can afford to drop one more game and make this playoff. Yeah, personally. And so what we're seeing in the Big 12 is really important. Iowa State and BYU are in prime position right now. If you're BYU, you take care of business on Saturday versus UCF. You've never been in a stronger position to make this playoff. If you're Iowa State, again, you're in really, really strong position. Now, beyond them, who can make it? Well, you got Kansas State with 1 loss sitting there, and they're a 16th ranked team in the country. I believe if they have a chance to make the playoff. And hear me out on this one. If Colorado can win out, I think they could be the 3rd team. And I think that the committee would love to get Deion and Colorado into this inaugural 12-team playoff. So you've got Shedeur Sanders, who's having a great season. He's been a great college quarterback. And you've got up until last week, Travis Hunter, who's my front runner for the Heisman, hands down. It's been a long time since we've seen a guy play both sides of the ball at such a high level like he's doing. God, there was a game. What was it, Drake, where he won like impact player on offense and defense? It was like our player of the game on both sides of the ball is Travis Hunter. Deion's got it cooking. He told the world last year, he said, you better get us now because this is the worst we're ever going to be. And then this year, I think they've taken steps forward. Clearly, Colorado is my dark horse from the Big 12 to make this 12-team playoff. I know there's some teams right in front of them right now when you look at the standings because they're sitting here at 6. You got Cincinnati technically in front of them and Texas Tech. Those guys are pretenders. I can't see them making the playoff. I think Colorado or Kansas State have a chance to get in.
Mike, I do think that Colorado, because of what they bring from a TV viewership standpoint, that's always in the conversation.
It is.
How big is your brand when it comes to college football playoff? If we're talking 9-3 Missouri or 9-3 LSU, I don't care who won head-to-head straight up. We're siding with LSU. The committee is going to go with a bigger brand in a lot of these conversations. And where I do want to give you a good nod on Colorado, they don't meet Iowa State or BYU down the rest of their path. They could reasonably finish at 10-2 and make it a really tough decision for the committee, even if they don't go to the Big 12 championship and win it. There is also so add that into the fold of what I'm about to give you, because that's separate from my scenario that puts all the weird algorithm X's and O's into it. So Colorado goes 10-2 and already makes this thing an entire crapshoot. Iowa State, finishing at 11-1, going 11-0 is on the table, certainly going into Kansas State, that last game of the year. If they drop that game, due to the head-to-head, K-State at 11-1 goes to the Big 12 championship and faces 12-0 BYU. So at this point, you're looking at 11-1 Iowa State, 11-1 Kansas State, 12-0 BYU. And if K-State's able to go to Arlington and beat BYU, you've got 2 12-win teams in the Big 12, both at 12-1, Kansas State, BYU. It's tough to keep any 12-win team out of the college football playoff. From there, you would have to deny 11-1 Iowa State, likely for a 2-loss team out of the SEC or the Big Ten, which I'm sure wouldn't shock anybody. Those two conferences are weighted differently. And then again, could you have Colorado sitting there as well? It doesn't fit. And again, we got 5 games to go. Dream scenario, and I'm already calling it in the middle of October. But Mike, it's on the table where the Big 12 could make some serious noise in the college football playoff, and it's not as far-fetched as it really could be.
Well, Drake, I think they're in prime position to get their conference champion and their conference runner-up into this playoff, right? So let's just start there. After that, could the 3rd place team sitting there with 2 losses possibly be and not having to play because Colorado's already got 2 losses, not having to play that Big 12 championship game? That might be a little bit of a blessing for them to not have to go in and get a 3rd loss since they're sitting there with 2 losses already. That's why I think that Colorado is in a really, really strong position to make this playoff if they can win out and not have to play that Big 12 championship. Look, a 12-team playoff has changed the math for a lot of teams here. If you were in the SEC or the Big Ten, not winning your conference championship, possibly in some cases, especially in the Big Ten, meant possibly not making the 12-team playoff or the 14 playoff. So here's what happens. You get there and you're the Big Ten. And how many times have we seen it when they had divisions? whoever the runner-up was, whoever you had Ohio State maybe sitting at 12-0, and they're going against like 8-4 Wisconsin or something.
Iowa, yeah.
Yeah, right. I think that the Big 12 avoids that scenario this year, where you have a conference champion that's undefeated or with one loss, and then a runner-up that's got so many losses, because of the elimination of divisions and a lot of these super conferences. It's changed the math, I think, here at the end, and it's given teams a lot. Like, look, we can win out, and I'm not saying that it's made conference championships meaningless because they weight that in terms of seeding in the playoff, but. Look, if you were going to win the conference anyway, you just want to get in.
Yep.
That's it. And if you're a coach and you're sitting there and you're thinking, I can't get over the Ohio State hump or in the Big 12, because the Big 12 has evolved over the last few years, obviously, with Oklahoma and Texas moving to the SEC. There's room for a new king on that hill. But what does that mean? Does that mean how much does winning the Big 12 mean to Colorado if they're getting in a 12-team playoff anyway? I think that with multiple losses, if they finish just behind the top two and they don't have to play that last game, that's exactly where you want to be, and you're in.
Yeah, Mike, before we talk about Gus Malzahn's future in Orlando, I, again, want to just go right back to right now, Iowa State's at 10, BYU's at 11. If those teams keep winning and supplant themselves in the top 6, the top 7 even, one loss might not completely bottom you out of the playoff. You're very well in the conversation or on the bubble, and that within itself would bode well for the brand of the Big 12. Coming up, what is the future for UCF when it comes to the guy who wears the headset? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On UCF crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. I know what you're thinking. Wow, I could go bet on BYU to beat UCF and they're underdogs, or I could bet on UCF because I think they're going to be able to run the football this week. And Jake Retzlaff, I don't know if I trust him, do I? And wow, I mean, Ja'Cory Brown's coming in and maybe he brings this whole new dynamic. And BYU's run defense wasn't that good last week. You can bet on either team at FanDuel. And right now, college football fans get a big return on FanDuel, which is America's $1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, too, you can check out latest stats, live play-by-play, and put live bets into FanDuel. It's simple. And, $5, just $5, win or lose, I'll give you $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, just for getting started. That is FanDuel.com. It's America's #1 sportsbook, and it's your place to wager on BYU and UCF this weekend. FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Visit them today. Mike G of the brand new Locked On UCF podcast. Is it time to make a change of the head coach in Orlando?
No.
Okay.
No.
You let it breathe there for a second.
No. And look, Gus Malzahn, they knew what they were getting into when they hired Gus Malzahn. And college football, again, he came in and the landscape is changing. Hell, his conference is changing. A lot of things are changing. You got to give him time to figure this out. But from a pure financial standpoint, Drake, UCF can't afford it. Right? They can't afford to fire Gus Malzahn right now. So his Achilles heel, what he's got to do is he's got to get in the portal and he's got to find his quarterback. They bet the farm on KJ Jefferson. A lot of UCF fans have been in my mentions saying, look, he messed up with KJ Jefferson. Welcome to college football. That's college football today, right now. There have been a lot of teams who have gone to the portal, spent a bunch of money to bet on a quarterback, and they've missed because elite quarterbacks are not a dime a dozen in college football today. I look at teams like Miami, who hit the jackpot with Cam Ward, seemingly. That guy is just completely unflappable, probably one of the best, if not the best quarterback gets in the portal. Now, can Gus Malzahn make UCF a destination, like a attractive destination for a top portal QB? It feels like this team is one QB away from, instead of sitting here at 3-4, maybe sitting here at 6-1 and being in the position that Kansas State is in right now in the Big 12. But it absolutely has been quarterback. They tried EJ Colson for, rotating those guys for a half, and then eventually they just went to Ja'Cory Brown. But He's limited, and you managed him, and he hasn't been good with his arm so far. So can he create that for you over the back half of this season and get you to a place where you got to go out and you got to find your quarterback of the future? In today's college football, it is really, really hard to win championships without dynamic quarterback play. Hear me out. Show me the examples of teams that are doing that consistently. Either guys are absolutely dynamite with their arm, or you've got dual threat guys who seem to just be emerging left and right that can get the job done both through the air and on the ground. I would say the last good example we had of a team, not maybe having super dynamic quarterback play and winning a championship was last year, Michigan. Yeah, at Michigan. Back before that, think about the Bryce Youngs and the guys who won. Joe Burrow had probably one of the
Trevor
best
Lawrence.
seasons.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, just absolutely dynamite quarterbacks there. Jalen Hurts, who is now practically NFL MVP conversation. It feels like last year. I think that's always going back to Auburn. That has been Gus Malzahn's Achilles heel. When he has gotten a quarterback, his teams have been in the conversation for championships. That's it. It's really that simple. So he's got to go out and find a quarterback. I don't think it's time to fire him yet, because at the end of the day, who are you going to go get? He can recruit. He can recruit well. His guys love him. He's a player's coach. And yes, the results on the field might not be what you want it to be right now. But I think, looking at where that buyout sits and how many years he has left on that contract, you just have to let him ride this out and figure it out. The UCF is a great city. They've got a great fan base, and they've got a growing and emerging culture. The bar is raising in terms of expectations, Drake. Yeah. People expect wins now. It's not good enough to just come in. Look back to 2017. They won every game in 2017. As a matter of fact, they waxed Auburn, who I've covered for a long time, in that bowl game. Absolutely. They took them to task, right? They have the ability to be one of those names in the conversation every single year, especially now that you can get 12 teams into a playoff. Gus Malzahn can get you there. As a matter of fact, if a 12-team playoff existed over the last, the inception of college football playoff, Gus would have had like 5 or 6 teams in it. Yeah. There's not a lot of coaches that can get that done, and he is still one of them. So, no, I don't think it's time to fire Gus. I think you got to hold on to him, and you got to see what he can do.
Huge on the quarterback conversation. Back to Matt Jones and Mitch Mustain when he was the OC at Arkansas, right?
Mustain.
Yeah, remember that one? That's a throwback. Listeners out there. I mean, those were Gus's guys. That was the Gus type of quarterback where he wanted to innovate very early on. And man, I go back to Hal Mummy and Mike Leach and watching those explosive offenses. And Gus says, hey, what if we throw the rock around, but we add in a quarterback who's mobile and can do both? And that was why I thought KJ Jefferson could thrive in Orlando. It ends up being a huge bust NIL-wise, especially. And Mike, maybe the thing putting the most pressure on Gus right now, and I've seen UCF fans call for Scott Frost, bring him back, who just fell flat on his face at Nebraska, but won a whole lot of games at UCF. For Gus, seeing BYU succeed at such a high rate in their second year of the Big 12 and seeing Cincinnati do the exact same thing in Houston, already made a head coaching change to bring themselves up in the conference. Whereas it feels like UCF regrets from last season. Are fans becoming restless watching the rest of the new Big 12 teams succeed at such a high level while UCF seems to be floundering this season?
Yeah. Look, they are. You're absolutely right. They are floundering, and I think it's a little. It's hard because you started 3-0, and then you got into the meat of your schedule, right? Yeah. And it seems like you haven't been able to get over that hump when it comes to the better teams in the conference. So it all comes back to, you busted with KJ Jefferson. Mm-hmm. You made that decision, Drake, and it just didn't pan out. And in today's college football, if you don't have 2 quarterbacks that can get the job done, you're playing with fire. Yeah. That's where Gus found himself suddenly. KJ was a bust, and now, who do I go to, right? Because, and it's not just poor play. You got to have a contingency in case of injury as well, too. You have 2 quarterbacks on your roster. Good luck. So, we've seen it. We've seen, sometimes the first guy you pick is not always the best guy. It's just not. Talent evaluation isn't an exact science. It's difficult, and we've seen this across college football where, Georgia, for example, recent national champion, JT Daniels won the job. Yep. Right. He lost his job to injury, and Stetson Bennett came in, was a game manager that first year. But boy, he made the room for the Heisman the next year. You'd be hard pressed to tell me that Stetson wasn't the best quarterback the entire time. JT became a college football hobo after that, traveling from program to program. Gus has got to find two quarterbacks to get himself into the conversation with the better teams in his conference, which, again, that's evolved because now these conferences have combined. It's no longer the P5, it's the P4, and you're up against a lot here. So, that's what it always comes back to for me.
JT Daniels, Kelly Bryant, Felipe Franks. I mean, we see so many of these guys that come through and you're like, uh-oh, this guy's going to be a star. They made the one right transfer, and that turned out to be the complete wrong transfer, and they become college. Yeah. Mike, before we get you out of here, tell us what Locked On UCF is for those who want to know more about you and the future of this show.
If you're a UCF fan, you got to make us your first listen of every day. We're putting out great content over there. My guy, Andrew Glucko from The Last Word on Sports, joins me multiple times a week to talk about all things UCF. He's been covering the program for the last 6 years. And we're bringing on some other guests as well this week to give fans a mix of great UCF content, perspectives, analysis, all of it, Drake. It's going to be the whole package over there. So go on over, subscribe, and make sure you turn on those alerts so you know when we're dropping UCF content for you.
Mike, if more folks want to follow you personally, where can they go?
At Mike Gittins on Twitter and Mike Gittins _ on Instagram. Like I said, I've covered, you mentioned it a bunch of times here. I've covered college football here for the last few years. I've covered it all. So happy to have joined the Locked On Network to bring fans something maybe they've never seen from UCF. We've got some connections down there. My guy Trevon Reed is going to be joining the show there. He's on Gus's coaching staff, and the director of high school recruiting, Jarris McIntyre, is going to join to talk a little bit in the offseason about what UCF is doing in recruiting. So follow me at Mike Gittins on Twitter to make sure you don't miss a thing.
Love it. That is, I like Mike G. I think Mike G is just such a cool name for a guy who hosts a podcast, the Locked On Podcast Network. That is Mike G. Thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, follow Locked On UCF wherever you find your podcasts, also on YouTube. This has been and always will be. Stay with us the rest of this week as we're covering all things UCF, the rest of the Big 12 as well. Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. UCF and Dose Grande. All right, got it.